Today, I do, so in my day job, I do some research on educational programs around STEM, science and technology. But today, really what I want to do is just tell my wife, Heidi, and my story, Heidi's on the call as well, with some observations about things we've learned along the way. And then, as Jim said, Jim M will talk about his experience, which is a little different from the one that I have. We'll have time for questions, and Bertolt will talk. I know some people on the call, as Jim said, have solar panels on their homes, but early on in the pandemic, Heidi and I decided we were going to walk every street in Western Springs and counted various things, yellow doors, whatever, things that interested us. I think we counted maybe 5 homes in Western Springs, certainly fewer than 10 that have solar panels. So there aren't many now, but there's every reason to think that this is going to be a really fast growing thing. So I'm glad you're all considering at least being part of that next wave. So here's our goal. After this hour, we hope you understand whether solar makes sense for you right now on your roof, or whether it makes sense on your roof later, or if rooftop solar won't work, whether there are other solar options. At the communications at a research center where I used to work, was fond of saying that presentations should follow a very simple structure. You should tell them what you're going to say. You should tell them what you said you're going to tell them, and then you should tell them what you told them. So here are the questions we use to advertise this presentation, and we're going to make sure at a minimum that we cover these questions. So the first one is, how do you get started? And of course, you've already started in a way. This is where our journey started. The Home Depot in Countryside. It was May 2018, and I think we were looking for an extension cord. I don't know, Heidi, you could jump in, confirm. But inside there's this little pop-up booth, and there was a guy from Tesla, a representative from Tesla. And electricity was on my mind because we had recently purchased a 2013 Nissan Leaf. Has a little battery, electric car, looks like a spaceship, it's really cute. And you may think of Tesla as a car company, but it's really not how Tesla thinks of Tesla. Tesla is an energy company, and in the UK, in fact, they're officially approved as an electrical utility, and they serve this function in Australia as well, and they're increasingly a presence in electricity production and grid balancing, the grid balancing market. In any case, at the Home Depot, the nice guy from Tesla wanted to sell Tesla, which was actually Panasonic panels, one of their partners. I gave him my contact information. We had some follow-up conversations, and that was my introduction. It was purely random. Lots more intentional ways to get started. And after talking to the rep from Tesla and getting some initial quotes that seemed expensive to me, I started looking around for more options. And I ended up pretty quickly at this website, Energy Sage. As it says here, Energy Sage allows you to get competing solar quotes. You can see reviews of different professional installers. There's lots of good information here. It's organized very well for neophytes, doesn't assume you know anything. It's organized well. So this is a great place to start. Another place to start is to ask yourself how old your roof is. I wanted to show you this close-up picture because this is what our roof looks like, where the solar panels are attached. And you see it's pretty basic, but it requires drilling lag bolts through a footing and into your rafters and putting rails on the roof and attaching panels on top of the rails and connecting wires to all of it, with lots of people walking around the roof. The general guidance is that your roof should not be more than 10 years old before you put something like this on top of it. And some say it's more like 5 or 6, because these installations are typically warranted for about 25 years. They're designed to produce energy with only a 10–15% drop off for 25 years. So that's a first consideration. Just ask yourself how old your roof is. Jim mentioned that my COVID project was installing solar and with Bryce up in Wisconsin. And here you can just see again sort of what these railings and footers and panels look like. This is what a solar installation looks like these days. It's the typical solar installation. But I wanted to show you this too, because there is now an emerging third kind of option. So if the basic recipe is have a good enough roof and then add footers and lag bolts and railings and panels, This is a different option entirely. And I don't know if anyone knows what we're looking at here. The car in the driveway provides some hint, and I can't see everybody, so I'm not. So I will just tell you, this is a Tesla solar roof. These are solar panels that are actually part of the roof itself. So this roof is made of solar panels. It's not distinct from solar panels, so a different model. And I'll show you another thing that was announced January 3rd. This is called the Timberline Solar Energy Shingle. And it will be produced by GAF Energy, which is the sister company of GAF, the largest roofing, waterproofing company in North America. These as well are shingles that are also solar panels. So this is a new area. If you contacted an installer today, if you contacted Tesla, you could get a quote on it. They're still ramping up production. These are not available. But as you think about your roof and putting solar on it, there is this emerging option to replace your roof with solar panels rather than replacing your roof and putting solar panels on top of it. And there are lots of interesting developments. Andersen, the Windows company, very recently announced that it was buying the leading company that integrates the collectors in transparent building glass. So you could have a solar roof and you could have solar windows, and this is all sort of coming down the pike. So jumping ahead to the end, this is what our installation looks like from the best possible vantage point, walking north on Woodland Avenue, across the street at a sort of high point in the terrain. And you can see on the left here, up in the left, the panels that go around. We have a skylight. And you can also see there are places where they flipped here a portrait orientation from a typical landscape orientation. So when they design the roof, they're looking to maximize where they can put panels. They're fitting them around things that are already on the roof, and they're able to change the orientations of the panels. It doesn't matter which orientation the panels are in. So how much electricity would your home produce? Illinois is actually a pretty good place for solar. And when Heidi and I were in Maine over the summer, we were surprised at how much we saw in Maine as well. But one tool in deciding whether it makes sense for you to consider solar on your roof is this website. It's a federally funded website called PV Watts. And at PV Watts, you just put in your address. You can see I put in my address here. You put in an estimated system size. We haven't talked about that yet. Some information about which direction your panels will be in, some basic information. You may not know all of it at first, but the defaults are typical for a typical installation. And it'll provide a rough idea of how much sunlight falls in that location and how that would be translated into power production. This is a very rough estimate for our address based upon the array size we had installed, and we installed a 9.8 kilowatt system. Systems are always measured in DC power. And so this was the initial estimate for how many kilowatt hours our location with a system of that size would produce in a given year. There are other places you can go to. Google's Project Sunroof. Here, this is also our home, and you can put in your address, similar kinds of estimates. And ComEd has a version. This is also our location using ComEd's. You can see here, of course, this is south. And so not surprisingly, these are the most productive places to put panels. North is typically the least productive because of, being in the Northern Hemisphere. These are Eastern, which are usually a little better. There's a little Western here. So these multiple sites that are available even before you do anything with any individual provider. Helioscope is a program that our installation company used to go into a little more detail, and they use it for mapping out. Here you can see they've mapped out the solar panels around the skylight there. There's the Nissan Leaf in the driveway, and there's some venting things on the roof that they're working around, but they really didn't need to work around much in our house. This is a chimney here that casts a little bit of a shadow, and these what they're calling field segments here are just strings, what are often called strings in these systems, That is, they're clusters of panels that are all wired together. So this kind of software, in this kind of software, they will make estimations for all the kinds of things that can degrade your performance. Could be dirt, it's shading, could be heat, a bunch of things. So this is where you'll get your sort of closest estimate. Once you get a system, there's a monitoring software that allows you to pretty much track in real time what your array is doing. And this is a monthly summary that comes from SunPower, which manufacture the panels on our home here in Western Springs. And this is from October 2020. So just to provide a bit of a guide on what you're seeing here, the bar height is total energy used at, each day at the house. The blue portion here is energy that's coming from the grid in October. And the green portion is energy that's coming from our panels. You can see this area that kind of zigs and zags, the area chart that zigs and zags. So there's net production in the first part of October, and then net energy use down here during most of the rest of the month. Then we had a couple sunny days, very end of October, that put us in the black there. So I confess I find these monitoring tools addictive, so fair warning. You can see up here, this is after 2 years of an installation. So we had our system installed and activated October 2018. So this is 2 years later. We had produced 22,311 kilowatt hours. And this was about the estimate of what we were told. You can see we're using more than we're producing. We had been told this would produce 84%. That was the estimate of our energy use, but it's not 84%. We added a new electric car with a larger battery, and we added a second electric car. And so Jim mentioned that I've recently added community solar, which we'll talk about, because there still is a gap between what solar panels are providing for the house and our energy use. This is an older version of their graphs, but you probably get the idea. The yellow gold here in this version is power production, and you can see power production through about January 20th, and then you can probably guess what happened in January 20th, 2019. We had a big snowstorm, and the snow stayed on the roof. We have a pretty shallow roof for a lot of where the panels are located, and so snow tends to stay up there a little longer than more steeply pitched roofs as things heat up. So the next question we wanted to address was, what about batteries? And there are three kind of labels, terms that are used to talk about systems. One of them is a grid-tied system, and that is a system that is just connected to the power grid, has no separate battery backup. When the sun shines, it produces power. If the grid goes down, the solar panels are automatically disconnected from the grid. I will say there's also some innovation in this space, so that you now are starting to be able to buy systems where if the grid is disconnected, you can still get usable energy from your solar panels. But as you can imagine, the basic issue here is when the grid goes down and ComEd needs to fix those lines, they don't want power coming into those lines that they're not prepared for. And so that's just a safety measure to do that. So that's what it means to be grid tied. A hybrid system, as you could guess, suggests there's a battery as backup in case the power goes down. Of course, there are other gasoline generators and other ways to provide backup. Batteries are still pretty expensive. I think for the system we were talking about, it was a $10,000 bump for the total price, and we didn't seriously consider it. ComEd has spent a lot of our money in the past decade improving the grid, improving reliability tremendously. Yes. So our power just doesn't go out that often. It wasn't worth it for us. As an aside, I was volunteering at an auto show a few years ago with an organization around clean vehicles, and talking with someone who oversees a section of the ComEd grid downtown in Chicago. And he told me, and maybe you guys know this, but at the suburbs, at this point, the leading cause of power grids going down is not storms, it's squirrels. And in Chicago, it's rats. This third category is off grid, and as you would guess, this is where the panels are not connected to an electric grid at all. These are pretty rare. As it says here, the cabin in the woods, the cabin that we have in the woods also has roads and electricity and gas and a whole bunch of things. But those really are all battery systems, not a grid. So the first way that I thought about solar panels and batteries is that the utility is in some way a battery when you're connected to the grid. That is, in this little animation, you can see that when it's sunny, the meter is running one direction. That is, it's taking power from the home if you're producing excess, as you saw, and putting it into the grid. You're essentially using ComEd as a storage for your energy credits. And then when the sun goes down, that energy comes back to you. Batteries are eligible for the federal tax credit that's available. And, you know, obviously, depending upon how important it is for you to have that kind of backup battery, backup electricity, those can be important. I'm going to ask Jim at this point to talk about this. This is a bit more detail on how these systems work.
Sure. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so fantastic so far. I've already learned a lot, and I do have solar panels on my roof, so this has been great. So yeah, essentially what you're seeing here is what a typical installation looks like. You know, it's kind of like a infographic of, you know, take the lovely picture of Stephen's home out, and this is basically what, you know, he should have, right? As you can see on top of the roof, number one, you know, there's the solar panels, right? That's what the sun hits and the energy gets created. And, you know, there's a power line that runs down the side of the roof and down the side of the home and into an inverter. And really that inverter is really just to kind of like, I think, you know, kind of monitor the power as the power comes in off the solar panels, make sure that the power is, you know, flowing correctly. And the solar meter is, again, I think you're kind of monitoring production, and sends, as you see on the right hand side too, it's also described, and it kind of, you know, monitors the information to, you know, my solar provider. And of course, then there is the main electric, you know, kind of service panel that will go into my home if I'm drawing power off of the panels at that time, or, you know, through that net meter, right? In that great animation that you saw from Stephen just a moment ago, you know, when the sun is shining, that net meter is, you know, sending power, you know, up through and into the telephone pole that you see there, you know, to the right, you know. But then when the sun is not shining and I'm up late watching a movie at my home in the basement, then I'm drawing power, you know, off of the grid, and that's all captured in a net meter. And it was pretty cool for me, you know, because I look at, you know, I have the app from my solar provider, and I can see, like Steven said, you know, I can see my solar production, you know, for the day, and, you know, see what it's doing. I can see the graph and how production's gone through the year. And also on my my ComEd bill as well, I can see both what I, you know, put into the grid and what I drew, you know, from the grid. So we can get to, you know, more about, you know, my story and what I've experienced after, well, both before and after the panels in a later slide, I think, Stephen, right? So maybe back to you.
Sure. So just one quick thing. When you install a solar panel system, you have to wait before you turn the thing on. And there are various, I mean, there's safety considerations, but one of the other considerations is when this says net meter, old meters couldn't tell the difference between electricity flowing in or out of the house, because there was no expectation that energy would be flowing out from the house into it. It was simply measuring changes, I think, in voltage. And so if you actually turn on your system before you have the net meter, that particular meter working, or if the one you have is working that way, you will actually be charged for every bit of electricity that you transfer back to the electric company. So this gets us to one of the other questions that we wanted to cover tonight, which is cost and then options for paying for these kind of systems. So I'll take a little time just to walk through this financial snapshot for the system we got, and just flag a couple things that you may want to follow up on later and clarify, because there's some detail here we won't cover. So there is the upfront project cost here. It was about $36,000. You can see it's given in a watt per watt figure. That's typical. $3.5–4 per watt has been a kind of typical all-in total installation cost per system. So that's a decent rule of thumb, sort of $4 per watt that you want to put in. Again, we have a 9.8 kilowatt DC system. As Jim said, the power coming off the roof is DC. Our homes run on AC, and so that inverter has to turn it from DC into AC, and there's some loss in that. But so you'll always hear measurements in DC. You'll see the federal tax incentive line at the time we made this purchase. Oops, sorry. It was 30%. It's currently 26% for 2022, so act fast, and then 22% in 2023. These are actually extensions. It was supposed to go away earlier than that, but legislation has extended that. It's not been extended into 2024 yet. So if that provides any urgency and it works for you, that'd be great. So that's where we are on the federal tax incentive. The next line says solar renewable energy credit, or SREC, REC income. Briefly, the state of Illinois has a goal for how much energy it wants to produce from renewable sources. And the state of Illinois has allocated funding to do that, different funding mechanisms, but that's the basic story. And they are willing to, whoever is building that capacity, that renewable energy capacity, is eligible in different ways to get some of that state funding to do that, to help them meet the goal. I think in the prior legislation, it was 25% of electricity from renewable sources. Now it's much, much higher by 2040 and so forth in the new legislation. But in any case, what it means is that because the state has a financial commitment to increasing renewable energy generation, they will pay individual homeowners, they will pay, as we'll talk about later, community solar providers, they'll pay businesses, others. So they're looking for ways to have people build out renewable capacity. And that's what that SREC is. Just one other thing, well, we'll get to it briefly at the end. So you can see then there's the simple math for us, 36 to begin with, these two things that come off. Now the SREC is income, and so it's taxable. So it's not exactly that beneficial because we paid taxes on it. But then you see these estimates for payoff periods and cumulative net income and rate of return and so forth. The one thing that this does not capture is that installed systems are valuable. And if you were to install a system and then sell your house with a system, it is worth $10,000–$20,000, depending on the size and so forth. So that's another thing to consider as you think about it. And obviously for timing. I mean, if you thought you were only going to live in your home for 5 years and you're really compelled to do this, you should at least appreciate how much value there is in the market for homes that already have these things installed and working. I think, Jim, this is the next place for you to jump in and talk about what we're seeing here, which is a leasing arrangement.
Cool. Yes. Thank you, Stephen. And again, my situation, a little bit different, as I decided to go the lease route. For me, what I found in my solar exploration was such that what I liked was that with my panels being leased, my solar provider is really responsible for the production. If we go through a hailstorm or if the panels go down, they come out and fix them, which I kind of liked. I mean, we don't really get golf ball size hail in Illinois yet, but I haven't had any problems so far. But anyway, I thought the lease, sounded like a good program for us to consider. So this is kind of like an illustration of what I got going on. And again, we can get into my broader story at a later point. But this is my first solar array, and essentially what you're seeing is like a projection on the left of kind of the cost per kilowatt hour from ComEd. There's different ways to estimate what that cost is, but you can kind of see that my home, a typical electric bill pre-solar was probably about between $80 and $100, a month, right? That's about what I was paying. That varies in the summer and the winter and stuff, but that's basically my average annual cost. And you can kind of see, what my annual cost is for the lease on the right, 842, per year. That's my annual lease payment. So essentially, instead of paying ComEd, I am paying my solar provider for the usage of the panels. And one of the things that you kind of lose out on, admittedly, when you lease is you don't get the federal tax credit, or you don't get the renewable energy credit, because I do not own the panels. That goes to my provider. But that was something I was willing to forego. And so everybody, it's your own, personal decision. But what you can see here is that, a potential advantage, the way I'm looking at this, is my annual cost is fixed, whereas the cost of producing power and delivering it to my home, is likely to go up, at an arguably, different rate. But you can see as power goes up, my lease stays the same. And as you heard Stephen say, the solar production, these panels are designed to really be, to produce electricity up to 30 years, right? That's generally how long they can last, and potentially longer. And as Stephen said, they only lose about 10 to 15% of their efficiency over time. So even in year 20, I'm still getting really good production out of these panels. And for me, it's a 20-year lease. And at the end of the lease term, I can buy the panels, right, for just like a negligible cost, right, $100, or something like that. Because at that point, the technology, as you heard, is already rapidly changing. So these probably won't be worth a ton of money 20 years or so from now, but they'll be worth something to me, presuming I'm still living in the home. And as Stephen said, for me, if I were to sell my home, of which I have no intention to do so, I would just ask the seller to either, buy me out of the lease or take on the lease, and I would just, transfer the lease, to them. But they would get the benefit of a fully operational system. And again, the way I looked at it is I try to be green too. Don't quite have the electric car just yet, but I really wanted to do what's right for the environment, and do my part to produce solar power, and get a little bit of savings along the way. So kind of instead of paying ComEd, I am kind of paying my provider, a little bit. So that's my scenario.
Yeah, wonderful. So let's talk about a third option, which we've mentioned, which is community solar. And in community solar, as you see in this pretty simple but effective diagram, solar energy is being produced in panels away from your home. These are often out in rural areas. If you're driving down the highway and you see a massive solar installation, that's typically what these are. These are also funded by the state, supported by the state. So community solar companies can get the SRECs, just as Jim's provider gets the SRECs. And so what that allows is, because there's a state subsidy for these panels and electricity production, it means that individuals can get some of those savings. They're not as large as if you install yourself. The returns aren't as great. But as you can see on the right side here, it's that there are these installations out in the community. And I liken this to a kind of, farm share thing as well, right? So a CSA, you can imagine buying a share of what's produced on a farm, and then you get your share delivered to you. This is really the same model. So the electricity is produced here, it goes into the grid. As we know, the grid doesn't care where electricity comes from. And then your individual bill is credited for the kilowatts of power that are being produced remotely and added to the grid. And typically you're getting about a 20% discount on the cost. So there is what's called a supply price. The ComEd sets a standard supply price for each kilowatt hour. And you have a contract to pay about 80% of that. So if you get 100 credits that would ordinarily cost you $50, or 100 kilowatt hours that would ordinarily cost you $50, you're going to pay $40 for those credits. This is, you can see there a link that Bertolt has identified, which is a good resource for learning more about this. This is a production site out in Rockford. This is a community production site through the company that I signed up with. Nexamp, again, we did it because of this gap between what our home was producing and what we're now using for home and electric cars. So this is not bad. I think we're just about where we wanted to be. So again, we wanted you to think about and be aware of options, whether your roof is in good shape now, if your roof is not in good shape, or if you're not interested, or there are other restrictions on putting residential solar, rooftop solar on your home. The last thing that we said we were going to do here was talk about what recent legislation in Illinois means for solar energy. And I know Bertolt has read through the entire act that was passed, just dramatic bit of legislature. But one thing fundamentally that the legislation does, is it provides a stable funding source for these solar credits, for these SRECs. When the last legislation was passed in 2016, there were estimates about how long it would take to use these credits. And they were used up for individual homes, for rooftop solar, they were used up within about 2 years, much faster. And there were a lot of people hung out to dry essentially for a couple years who had planned to build rooftop systems, but this key funding had disappeared. It had all been used up, and the legislature had not replenished that funding source. So one of the key things about this for rooftop solar and for community solar is that it provides a stable funding source. Some of the money that ComEd would have given back to folks as a rebate has been converted to make sure that these things are happening. The other thing that legislation is doing is a nice segue to something else I hope you'll consider, which is a March presentation that we're going to do on electric vehicles. Because the other thing that legislation does is it makes Illinois the leader, not just in renewable energy goals and realistic use of renewable energy goals, but it also really makes Illinois the leader in EV support, both individual EVs and purchasing EVs, and supporting the infrastructure to charge those EVs. So that is the formal presentation. Here, obviously, our email addresses. And so I think this is the point when, I don't know, Jim, do you want to take it back, or Joe, take it back? And looking here, doesn't like we don't have any questions. We don't really have any questions in the chat that I see, but this is a chance. I'm going to stop sharing, and this is a chance for questions. And then also for those of you, including Bertolt, who know more details about this thing, things you want to fill in, I think this is the opportunity to do that as well.
It's a perfect presentation, Stephen. Well done.
Thank you.
No questions. Everybody's got it.
Yeah, very good, Stephen. Great job doing this. Actually, I wanted to fill in some information about it was not that the money had run out. The money was there, but the way this works with the RICS. The RICS money is paid out a little bit later, not at the time when it's needed, really. And there was legislation. So the money, if you look at your ComEd bill under taxes and fees, there's one line that's called renewable portfolio standard. For every kilowatt hour that you that's basically that you buy when you buy electricity, you pay a fraction of a cent into a fund that's held at ComEd. That's the money that is used for the RICS. Now, the legislation said unspent funds have to be returned to ratepayers if after 4 years. And so that was the Future Energy Jobs Act was passed, went into effect June 1, 2017. So now in 2021, that was the 4 years where, as you know, the 4 years were up in 2021, yes. In fact, I had one bill, when I looked at my bill, there was actually one bill that was actually I was given a refund. It was not a charge, but it was a negative amount. So this had already started to refund money. And because of that cliff, the IPA could not open any more RICS. They could not make any promises because it takes a while until this system is built, until there are the RICS. That's why, and that's what the legislation changed. That is one thing that had to be changed, but it's to change much more. There's first of all, they fixed that problem with the 4 years is still on the books, but anything that's under contract will still get the money. So the wording was done so that this was fixed.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I just want to note that there is, Mel has raised a question about roofs. I mean, my short answer is that there are mounting options, both for metal and for standard shingle roofs. So I don't think there's any particular advantage or disadvantage as it relates to solar panels on your roof.
And Stephen, you seemed also to be familiar with like the shingles themselves that are solar. I mean, my story is that, you know, I did mine in June of 19, right? And my roof needed to be replaced. And I also wanted the panels, right? So I worked with a roofer, a well-established roofer, and I just did standard shingles. But Mel, my warranty that came with the shingles is a 50-year transferable warranty. Chances are I will not be in this house 50 years from now. So whoever buys it gets good shingles with a transferable warranty and solar panels on the roof. So at least that's my story. But I mean, Stephen, you mentioned the shingles themselves that are solar. I mean, where's that at? You know, I guess maybe cost wise, if people are saying, well, I got to reshingle my roof anyway, maybe I put on, you know, the solar enabled shingles themselves.
Looks like Bertold wants to answer this too.
Yeah. I would like to add some information. So this technology has been around for a while. It's basically, you can have printing presses to make these the thin film solar cells. They're not silicon technology. The Tesla, they are miniature silicon solar cells in the shingles, and the Tesla solar shingles are very expensive. So that's a real investment. It looks nice. There's still questions whether, you know, because the fire code always needs you have a roof, like a spaces on the roof left in case firefighters need to go on the roof, whether you can have solar shingles all over the roof, because it's just like solar panels. That's why solar panels have to have the setbacks according to the fire code. That is a question I don't know. About these thin film shingles, the other ones that Steve showed, the technology is far behind in terms of output, of efficiency with the silicon. So the same square footage of those thin film ones, the second ones, you know, with the wet roof that you saw, those they produce much less electricity. So they are not yet a good alternative, I would say. but they're nice. They're basically foldable. You can do lots with it, but it's and they're cheaper to produce. But you need much more square footage if you want to have a decent output.
Yeah, okay. And so we also have a question, maybe this is to Joe and Jim, like how are we going to make the slides available to the group after the call?
Yeah, I type back in there. Yeah, we're working with the church office to figure out how to do that. So, but they have done it for other things. So it's,
I got it.
It's not a long shot.
Sorry, I see that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's no. If I could speak on the roof component as well. So the metal roof construction will allow you to adhere directly to the roof membrane, so or the roof metal. So you remove the need for a rack, which is what Stephen showed on his close-up. So that thing that bolts through the roof is not needed on a metal roof system. So you might save a little money, at least as far as that installation costs go. I don't know how the metal roof compares in cost to the shingle roof, but that's one thing to keep in mind. And of course, with the metal roof, you have some sound issues when it rains and hails and that kind of stuff. But I don't know that there's a better way to do that, one over the other.
And also with respect to the roof, this is Greg. For perspective, we put solar panels on our house in 2009. And at the time, the house was 12 years old. And we decided that we would re-roof the section where we were going to put the solar panels, which we did. And we put solar panels up. And now the house is 25 years old. And we re-roofed the rest of the house this past spring. And when we did that, we asked the guys to check out the roof underneath the panels. And they said it was fine because it had been protected. That particular area of the roof had been protected by the panels for 13 years. So for what it's worth, it's worked out well for us.
And Greg, are you metal or standard like asphalt shingles?
Standard asphalt shingles.
Yeah. As am I, asphalt shingles. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Stephen, do you want to answer the next one about the?
Yeah, let me just quickly show again. I'll share screen here. So Jim has a question. Can you see that? Just a thumbs
Yes.
up.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the question, Jim, your question is what's happening down here? Is that right? Is this the graph? Sorry, I can't see anyone. So you can nod though. Is this the area that we're talking about right down here? This, yeah. So this is negative. So this just means here we're producing more than we're using. Here we're using more than we're producing. And you can sort of do the math as you look at the relative ratio of green, which is solar production, and blue, which is energy coming off the grid. So here, where you would expect it, because we have more green than blue, we're net energy producers. Here, where we have much more blue than green, we're net energy users. So early October, sunny, whatever, we're getting some energy. Middle of October, it's October, and then we have a magical couple days here where it's sunny, and we're back briefly in either the green or the black, depending on how you think about it. So
and if I may add to that, Stephen, like for me, when I see my graph for like a rolling 12-month period, right? Like in the spring, summer, and fall, when we generally get more sun than we do our dreary kind of, winter days, my array is producing more than I'm using, right? And basically what that allows for me to do is get credits, with like ComEd, right? And that'll almost be like an IOU, right? That later when I have those dreary days and my production doesn't cover my usage and I'm drawing from the grid, I'm able to then draw on those credits. Like, so for example, in my first 12 months of like using my stuff, my array, I didn't pay $1 in, energy usage until like, October or November, or something like that, right? I had produced, that much power, during the summer to cover, my winter usage. And I was telling the group that I had an issue in, with COVID and working from home and all that. My usage shot up. My panels were the same. So I applied to get like even more panels put on the roof. So I'm hopeful that, again, I'll get back to the place where I was before, where I'm producing enough that I'm just completely offsetting my usage.
Yep. So just to jump quickly to the live view. So this is today's production for this house. So, here we are at 8 o'clock at night, about 50%. So produced about 16.5 kilowatt hours, used a little more than that. Obviously by midnight, it'll go down. If we look at the year, same thing as you're describing. Oh, well, 2021, new year. You'll see similar things. Now here's a period where we were disconnected. There was a problem in not monitoring, but you'll see in July. Sorry, this is, as I'm dragging things, it's trying to give more information. But we experienced the same thing. In general, I'll stop sharing because that's not really helpful. But in general, April and May are really plus months. You start running air conditioners. September is often a plus, but so you have these sort of shoulder seasons where you're getting good sunlight and you're not using a lot of extra energy for air conditioning. I know we're approaching 8 o'clock, but I also know that those of us who've been organizing this are happy to talk more if people have more questions. And of course, we can make I can share the presentation. That's fine. We'll make sure that happens. And you have emails, you know how to get in touch with us.
And I just want to say thank you for making the time, everyone, for joining and listening in. And I said to, some of the other, organizers and presenters, I said, if this gets, one more individual, residents or even one of your friends to, get solar panels, on their roof and help the environment and help each other, then, we've achieved something great tonight.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for doing this. We'll get out to everyone how to get a copy of the recording so you can spread it amongst your friends, families, all those people. But again, thank you. A great program. Thanks to our presenters. Thanks to everyone that helped with this. Thanks, Joe. He's been spearheading the green team for a long time now. So thank you, Joe. I think that wraps it up. Any final questions? If not, okay. Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.